Kale, cupcakes, food trucks, fondue. Food fads come and go, but what endures? A new food fad will always take its place. Food writer David Sachs is here to help us sort it all out. He is the author of The Tastemakers, Why We're Crazy for Cupcakes but Fed Up with Fondue. And David, it is nice to have you back in that chair for the first time in, how long has it been now? 5 years or so.
Yeah, at least.
Good to have you back. I have to say, that's the grossest thing I've ever seen in my life, I think. Right? Am I wrong about this?
You know what? Someone gave me a quinoa cupcake version with bacon icing, so there's always a grosser thing that you can have.
I guess so, but that's pretty. A chocolate cupcake with bacon and...
I think it's a maple caramel salted icing and bacon on top.
Yeah. All those things separately? Awesome. Put them all together? Kind of not. Anyway, let's get into this. What initially made you want to write a book on food trends?
You know, I was writing about food for a bunch of different publications and sort of food culture, so cuisine, chefs, but also the food business. And what I kept noticing was that two separate things were happening. One, in the world of the food business, there were these large forces, companies that were really investing a ton of money to try to make the next trend, to shape our taste. And it kind of made me interested to wonder, you know, how is our taste shaped? Why all of a sudden do we crave something when before we didn't? Sriracha, let's say, or
what did
kale.
you just say?
Sriracha, the Vietnamese or Southeast Asian hot sauce, which nobody had heard of 10 years ago outside of those countries, and now is, you know, the fourth condiment in North America. And the other thing was something I was noticing just here in Toronto and where I was traveling, which is, you know, I remember in 2009 I went on a trip to Mexico and ate a lot of fish tacos because we were on the coast and it was delicious. And I came back to Toronto and I'm like, all right, I want some fish tacos. And I looked around the city and I couldn't find them. There was like one place way out in the suburbs that had something like it and it was just terrible. And fast forward 2 years later, and there were fish tacos on every single corner of this town. It's not as though the population of Mexican Canadians grew by any great margin. It's that the food trend had arrived, and suddenly you can get fish tacos at the Air Canada Centre and at the airport and in convenience stores and in every bar and pub around the studio and around the city and around the province. And I wanted to know how that happened, how suddenly our collective appetite shifted as one, when we all seem to believe we have individual tastes.
And thus you have written a book about it. How far back in time can you chart these food trends and the impact they apparently have on us? Well,
food trends have always really been there as long as we're not eating for pure sustenance, right? As long as human beings have had an option in what they're able to eat and the means to procure that, they've been able to make choice, and their tastes have sort of shifted. The Romans were, you know, stuffing quails inside of pigeons instead of goats or whatever the heck they did. That was the taste of that time. You know, the Viennese and the Austrian coffee house sort of was the original Starbucks boom movement, right? The first wave of coffee houses when coffee came out of Ethiopia. So food trends have always been there. They're what push our food world forward. They're what allow us to evolve our cuisines from sort of a stagnant place. But what's changed really in the 20th century, and increasingly, you know, I'd say substantially in the 21st century, is the speed at which that's happening and the scale at which that's happening.
Is that a worldwide phenomenon or is that a North American thing?
I think initially it was a North American thing, and it still is more dynamic in North America because we don't have a very rigid, set traditional cuisine here, right? We've always been cultural omnivores, willing to sort of take whatever the world can give us and transform it into something fat and delicious. But increasingly you're seeing it because it's a global world, right? People in Thailand or South America, you know, in Brazil, have the same access to blogs and information and photos about food trends that are happening anywhere in the world, and increasingly access to the same products and information. So it's becoming more global.
You've identified 4 different categories of food trends, and we're going to go through them here now. And we're going to start with what's on the cover of your book, that delicious looking cupcake. It is, you tell us, the defining food trend of the age of food trends. Really? How so?
I wouldn't say the taste of it, right? A cupcake is nothing new. You probably had cupcakes as a child, you know, for your birthday party. I know I certainly did. But what the cupcake represents in the 21st century is is the viral food trend. It is the food trend in the age of the internet, in the age of the Food Network, in the age of social media. An idea and a flavor and something encapsulated in something as benign and ridiculous as, you know, a small cake that can grow into this multi-billion-dollar a year industry, ranging from bakery chains to supermarket cupcakes to various reality shows, competing reality shows about cupcakes. And so it shows where food trends are now. And so, you know, I think the cupcake is this fantastic window into what we can call a cultural food trend, right? Not a new food, not something that has been invented, not something that's there for health reasons or flavor reasons, simply a food that's having its cultural moment.
It's definitely not there for health reasons, because I remember Michael Pollan being in that chair once and saying that he'd had a cupcake in, you know, wrapped in cellophane or whatever it is, on his shelf in his office for I think 2 years, and for the heck of it, he opened it up and ate it 2 years later, and you could still eat it. And he thinks any food that survives that long, you know, has got to be disgusting, and it probably is, right? How did it start?
The cupcake trend began kind of by happenstance. There was a small bakery in Greenwich Village, New York, called the Magnolia Bakery, which opened up in 1995, and you know, they didn't even serve cupcakes at first, but a couple months later, they ended up making a batch because they had leftover dough from a birthday cake they were making. And the cupcakes sold well, and word of mouth spread organically. And this is how food trends generally start, or previously started. But what really sort of grew it into this big thing, as it grew over the next couple of years, was these different cultural factors and media factors, which are so much more now. So the Magnolia Bakery, there was a 1-20-second scene in one episode of Sex and the City where two of the main characters are sitting outside eating cupcakes. They're not talking about cupcakes, they don't mention cupcakes. They're talking about men, obviously, but they take a bite of the cupcake and that's it. But that scene was replayed over and over online, and replayed in reruns and written about and talked about by travel media, fashion media. Oh, if you want to be like the girls, you know, go to New York and eat this cupcake here. And so the cultural narrative around the cupcake, which was, you know, childhood birthday parties, right? A very adolescent food. An adult wouldn't be caught dead eating one in 1992. Suddenly became something that was associated with feminism and consumer culture and luxury. And this happened at the same time that the food media online was really exploding. So previously, food media and sort of the world of foodies was a very narrow phenomenon. It was well-educated, wealthy people, well-traveled, epicures, you know, kind of snooty, who cared about the right cheese and the right Beaujolais Nouveau from the right appellation. And all of a sudden, you had this explosion of you know, accessible democratic food media online and in other places like the Food Network, where people could talk about anything. You could have a blog dedicated to cupcakes and you could live anywhere in the world. You didn't have to be in New York. People were suddenly sharing information and stories, and these communities grew. And of course, as social media came out, you know, first Facebook and then Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest, the cupcakes were the perfect vehicle for it, because you could do anything with it.
Do you think it says something about the gullibility, though, of the consuming public that a 20-second scene in a television show with admittedly two attractive women talking about shoes and scarves and whatever else, munching on something that is obviously bad for you? Never mind that it's not healthy, it's actually bad for you.
Oh, well, you know.
Is that problematic at all?
I don't think so. I think that's taking a pretty
too grim an approach, eh?
Well, a puritanical approach. Listen, the food that people get excited about is the food that's bad for you or not great for you, right? Yes, there has been a trend around kale and kale salads, but you know, as big as the cupcake trend was the bacon trend.
Well, I was going to say, look at the bacon's on top of the cupcake.
Where there are videos of people, you know, making a burger with 20 strips of bacon on it online, and different competitions for how many strips of bacon you can wrap around a turkey and stuff with sausage.
That is a heart attack to go, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. I think that's the name of the blog. And so it captured the imagination in all sorts of ways, because it could go in many ways, right? You had people making vegan, dairy-free, healthy quinoa cupcakes. You had people making cupcakes with 20 strips of bacon on them. You had luxury cupcakes. There were cupcakes in Dubai that they were putting gold leaf on, and you know, whatever else they do in Dubai. And there were sort of homespun, homemade cupcakes that people would decorate in their homes and compete on. It was the tabula rasa, which is why it grew so big as a food trend, because it could do anything. It could go anywhere.
Are chefs, though, the leading, I appreciate the girls from Sex and the City are tastemakers, I get that.
Right.
But are chefs today really the prime influencers in terms of tastemakers?
I think so. I think in terms of both creating a new trend. So occasionally, a chef will create an item in their restaurant, and that item will become so popular that it kicks off its own food trend. And then in other instances, what they're doing is growing and reinforcing that trend. They're maybe taking something that someone else did, whether it's a cupcake or a kale salad or some other item that a chef creates, and then they put it on their menu and put their own spin on it. Whether they happen to be, a television celebrity chef, or whether they happen to just be the local chef at a popular restaurant.
Give us an example of that. A TV celebrity chef who started something and it exploded.
Well, I think a really great example from the past couple of years is the New York chef David Chang, who owns the Momofuku group of restaurants, one of which is here in Toronto. He created a number of different items at his restaurant. There was a whole style of cooking, but there are a number of different things that were his signature, right? He's credited with sort of bringing back ramen soup, Japanese ramen soup. He certainly didn't invent ramen. He didn't even invent a new type of ramen, but he popularized it at his noodle bar. And he also created these sort of Chinese-style soft buns with pork belly in them that, not only inspired many chefs to do similar things or with different ingredients, both here in Ontario and in other places, but kicked off this fever for pork belly as an ingredient, which again found its way into all sorts of different dishes and different iterations.
But you don't have to be a chef though, right? I mean, I always like to call him this. TV's Dr. Oz is not a chef, and yet he's a tastemaker in some respects, isn't he?
Yeah, well, that's the other type of health trend. So, there are chef-driven trends, there are cultural trends, health and wellness trends. You're talking about, the good stuff. So someone like Dr. Oz is a huge promoter of various health and wellness food trends, and he has a tremendous impact. A couple years ago, my father all of a sudden was eating just tons of blueberries. And I said, what's going on? What's with all the blueberries? Oh, Dr. Oz says they're full of antioxidants and they're great and they're going to prevent, cancer and heart attacks and baldness and aging and
cloudy days.
Cloudy days, exactly. And these are some of the most powerful trends out there. I mean, the rise of gluten-free is a big one. There's been no marked increase in the rates of celiac disease within the population, and yet, big percentages of the population are gluten-free or partly gluten-free with little or no evidence around it.
When I was a kid, eggs were good.
Right.
And then I got a little older and eggs were bad because too much cholesterol and they were going to make you unhealthy. And then I got a little older and eggs were good again because they had omega something or other happening in there that was supposed to be good for you. What accounts for all this confusion?
I think it's people taking, the evidence that's available and extrapolating it out into a wildly illogical place. Dr. Oz being one of the biggest sort of criminals around this. There's one small study that could show the benefit or the harm in a given food. Oh, we've studied, we believe this type of cholesterol is bad, therefore don't eat all eggs. Or we believe this type of antioxidant may be beneficial for this, therefore eat as much antioxidants as you possibly can. It's this search for the magic bullet, for the fountain of youth, for perfection in one food or one diet. And over time, consistently, over and over again, it doesn't exist. That thing doesn't exist. We know that it's eat a balanced, moderate diet with fruits and vegetables, but protein and fats and all these other things, and you'll be okay and don't need a lot of processed things. You can eat the cupcake that you make for yourself with real butter and eggs and milk, but don't eat the one that's been sitting in the cellophane for 2 years.
On Michael Pollan's shelf.
Specifically his shelf.
Exactly. But let's get to this then, finally, in our remaining moments here. Some people are going to watch our conversation here and think, boy, this is all really silly. And I need you to tell me why it's relevant.
Because everything you eat is influenced by food trends. And our tastes are always changing. If you're the type of person who wakes up and you've been eating the same thing every day for your entire life, day in, day out, and you only eat it, because that's exactly what's prescribed for you, that's fine. But most of us open up a menu or open the fridge and open the cupboard and think to themselves, even subconsciously, what am I gonna eat now? What am I gonna eat next? And for many people, it's stressful. And so understanding the forces that go into it, understanding the forces that have you suddenly shift from the butter to the margarine and then back to the butter, and giving yourself that knowledge and a bit of that skepticism will allow you to see when something will be a fad and when something will be a trend, when to believe something and when not to, when to take a bite and when to give it a pass.
Is this an issue, though, that is really only of interest to people who have sort of the luxury to spend enough money to worry about this kind of thing?
In a way, I mean, listen, if you're purely looking to subsist and live, yeah, if you're just wondering where your next calorie is going to come from, you don't care where that cupcake's been. It's there and it's something to eat. But I think for the majority of the population, even in North America, even in lower income households and regions, we have choice. We have abundance that those in developing nations can't even imagine. Even at the supermarket, even at McDonald's. Mm-hmm. And so understanding the logic behind that and how that works, being a better informed food consumer allows you to make better informed decisions, and ultimately healthier ones are ones that'll make you happier.
Indeed. Food trends and politics. Do you see a connection there?
Absolutely. Food trends wield tremendous political power. Think back 10 years ago here in Toronto. And there were a whole group of chefs that lobbied at City Hall and said, we need street food. We don't have street food. All we have are these hot dogs, which, the hot dogs are fine. But we need more variety. And I remember they opened up something at Nathan Phillips Square, and, one chef had congee with duck leg in it and or frog's legs, and some other chef did. So they were all doing this weird outlandish thing, and it just died. The city said, no, forget it. We're not doing this stuff. Street food. Hot dogs it is. And then what happened is, starting in the United States in Southern California in 2008 and expanding very quickly around the continent, you had this explosion of gourmet food trucks. Started by a chef named Roy Choi in Los Angeles. He was sort of the first with his kogi truck, but it blew up and it conquered pretty much every city. And it got to the point where here in Toronto and in other places around the provinces, in other cities, London, Hamilton, Collingwood, where my family has a cottage, you had people clamoring for food trucks. They were opening food trucks. And the city was saying, well, the bylaws don't say. But people were saying, no, this is something we want. Because now it was a trend. They read about it. They saw it. Maybe they'd travel somewhere and eaten at one of these food trucks. They wanted in with it. They didn't want their politicians to tell them no. And even though the restaurant groups opposed it and the business improvement districts opposed it, and they had vastly more money than these handful of food truck owner-operators with very little cash behind them, what the food trucks had was the political capital of a food trend.
And the public wanted it, right?
And the public wanted it.
The people were with them.
Yeah, you stand between someone and their lunch, and
it's a bad place to be.
Exactly.
Let's finish up on this. The next big food trend. What are you seeing?
The next big food trend, I think, is what some people are calling sort of a return to simplicity. And this is a pendulum that generally swings, but I think there's been, over the past number of years, between molecular gastronomy and even just sort of certain creations of chefs of this new wave fusion, which chefs like David Chang help bring on, where you're combining 10 different cuisines in one, or sort of doing mashups, as they call them. There's been this desire for again, simpler things. Not necessarily comfort food, but simpler preparations of food that go in a better way. So you're seeing a lot of restaurants that are having wood-burning ovens, wood-fired grills, real sort of hearty, more basic stuff, where they're dialing back the confusion to do something that's a little more straightforward. And then, of course, 10 years down the line, it's going to go the other way.
It'll be something else. Next time we do this, we really should get the folks in the control room to serve some food while we're doing it.
I know, the water isn't cutting it.
The water is just not cutting it, you're right. The Tastemakers, David Sachs. Great to see you again, David. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.